make that happen, though.
Right.
I mean, you've got a lot of committee chairs, you know, a lot of Republicans frothing at the bit, waiting to get back in power here, and that does not sound too good to them. They don't.
Well, here's my, if it doesn't sound good to you, maybe you ought to get out of Washington. Because the American people are fed up with that type of doing business. And if you're gonna run for office as a Republican and basically say, elect me and I'm gonna go to Washington, D.C. and try to get as many earmarks and as much money and send it back to this state, that is the reason Republicans got beat in 2006 and 2008. And those that do not see that are either tone deaf or, for whatever reason, I will suggest to you, do not deserve to be back in Washington, D.C. Now, that may be offensive to some of them, but Americans are really upset with the mentality of Washington being the epicenter of all decision-making and taking our money and deciding for us how it is best spent.
You know, I was struck by this in your speech yesterday, and in comparison to other very fine speeches here at the conference, yours seemed to be the most message-driven to the Republican establishment of the speeches that I heard yesterday. That there was one point in your speech, and I know I'm not going to be able to quote this word for word, but don't tell me you're a Republican and then you don't protect the innocent. Don't tell me you're a Republican and then you vote to spend tons of money. And I know I'm not quoting that exactly, but you know the part I'm talking about.
You're getting it right.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad. But are you surprised that maybe there isn't more of that sort of challenge to the Republican establishment that's happening here at the SRLC?
Well, anyone who has not been paying attention over the last year, again, either is tone deaf or maybe should be doing something else rather than being engaged in the political process. Americans don't want, I mean, look at the polls out there on the standpoint of the support for this health care bill that Washington crammed down their throats. That's not good politics, and it's not good policy. Americans are scared, they are upset that we have an administration and a Congress in place that is not listening to. And November the 2nd of 2010, I think, is a real day of reckoning. My hope is, again, that enough men and women will stand up and proclaim that they want to go to Washington, D.C. and make Washington as inconsequential in the people's lives as they can. And if that message resonates, then they will be elected.
Do you think Republicans have learned the lesson from 2006 and 2008?
I do. I think you hear individuals who will stand up and clearly say, we made a mistake of getting away from the core values that people expect Republicans to adhere to. For instance, we spent too much money. I mean, if there is a Republican that stands up and says, we didn't spend enough money, I haven't met that individual yet. We spent too much money in Washington, D.C. We got away from being fiscal conservatives. I tell people there are three things that you better be if you're going to be a Republican. You better be an individual who's willing to stand up for innocent life. You better be a fiscal conservative, and you better be a strong supporter of the military and law and order. After that, it kind of falls off the radar screen pretty fast from my perspective. Those are the three tenets. And we got away from a couple of those when we were in power in Washington, D.C. We haven't done that in Texas. We have stayed true to those principles, tax-wise, regulatory-wise, legal-wise, and that skilled workforce through accountable public schools. That simple set of principles. And then you have to get out of the way. Government needs to understand that they are part of the problem if they continue to stay in the way of the private sector doing what the private sector does best, which is create jobs, which in turn create wealth. That's the key.
What do you think about people who say that Republicans are just mean, that the policy is mean? I read an article a couple of years ago, I think it was New York Times, was calling Houston the meanest city in the country. And at the time we had like a 4%, 3.5% unemployment rate, and I was like, well, they have jobs. What's mean about having a job?
The most important thing that a governor can do is be a pro-business, pro-jobs governor, because that is giving what I consider to be the most important thing that government can be engaged in, is the creation of the environment where jobs are created. That's the most important thing. That's how you take care of your family. That's how you feel good about yourself. I don't think I've yet to meet any people who have come up to me and said, gee, I hope I get to stay on a government program for my whole life.
Yeah.
I aspire to be a recipient of government largesse for the rest of my life. That's not. Human nature is to be independent. Human nature is to be free. Human nature is to seek liberty and justice. And I think we do a pretty good job of that in the state of Texas. We've got our challenges. You can't be the #1 exporting state in the nation and not be impacted by this global recession that's going on. But I don't think there's any place in America a person who is looking to have a good future and a job would rather live than in a state like Texas.